Hey loves, welcome back to the Change Your Life series. Today I want to talk to you about setting boundaries. This has been a really kind of emotional topic for me throughout my life. It's not easy when you care about people to let them know that you need them to behave perhaps a little differently than they might expect. And it's never easy to receive that kind of feedback, whether we're receiving the feedback or they're the ones receiving the feedback. I just remember there was a certain situation when I was a lot younger, when I was in college, and I had told a friend, I think we need boundaries. Because, she was living, I think, just the way that she's used to living within her home and family, but it wasn't a culture that I was very used to or that I felt comfortable with. And I remember the response being one of kind of making fun of it, not necessarily taking it seriously, even in some cases criticizing my requests for boundaries. And I remember feeling like when you're in a very close friendship or when you're in a family-like relationship, you're not necessarily allowed to set boundaries, because you're either hurting the person by choosing to set boundaries, or it's just the law of the land. When you're family and when you're friends, then there's more of a playing field in what a person's allowed to do and what a person's allowed to say. Like, that was what I was learning on a regular basis. And that was what this situation just kind of reinforced for me, is it's not okay to ask for boundaries. And if you do, you're likely to either be made fun of or to be considered insensitive. And just recently, I noticed how that kind of set the tone for behavior later in different relationships, where when I wanted to set a boundary or when a situation didn't feel good to me, it became difficult for me to speak up. Before that, I didn't have really a problem, but I noticed that the more I had these kinds of situations, these kind of reactions of people being uncomfortable with my desire for, I wouldn't even necessarily call it boundaries. I would just be for more of a consciousness of how we choose to interact with each other. The more I realized that people were uncomfortable with that, the more I felt like it's wrong to be like that, or I'm just different, I'm just weird, I'm strange. And the reason I choose to speak on it today is because I feel like it's something that's become a bit of a topic. And to me, boundaries simply means this feels uncomfortable to me. And why wouldn't that interest someone who considers themselves to be family or considers themselves to be friends? I think there's an opportunity in how we word what it is that we feel to actually invite conversation. And depending on how a person reacts to that invitation, that's already a lot of information about whether or not this is a healthy relationship that actually has the intention or the ability to support you and be there for you on your path. So one thing that I've learned or noticed on my path to understanding setting boundaries is, first of all, to define what that means for me. Boundaries can sound so negative. It can sound like it's distancing, like it's pushing someone away, which I assume is how people sometimes felt like, oh, she's pushing me away. To me, boundaries, again, is simply saying this feels uncomfortable for me. Let's find a different way to address this. Let's find a different way to go about this. And once I defined boundaries for me, I felt much more comfortable with the topic. It felt less derisive, less harmful to others. It's simply saying, let's find another way to relate so that we both feel comfortable. So on this path, I would just encourage you to consider, what does that mean for you? What is it? How would you define it? And when we define something, or when we stop and take a moment to really understand our relationship to a particular word, to a particular behavior, then we give ourselves an opportunity to really understand ourselves better and also stand by ourselves in situations where others might criticize us. So in reflecting on what boundaries mean to me, I also discovered that there's an opportunity to simply be honest and invite people to conversation. So, for example, it can be difficult to say the word no, just flat out no. And I think we should be comfortable doing that, and we should give ourselves permission to do that. But there are certain situations where either we're not ready, or it's not the type of relationship that we have with that person. There's an opportunity to actually have more discourse. And so in those kind of situations, I like to say something like, well, I think it would feel better for me if we would do it this way. Or I noticed that what I need is actually XYZ. Just getting to know what is it that I need, what is it that I want, and giving yourself an opportunity to express that. So I'm not necessarily saying no, but I am making clear the option that you're presenting doesn't resonate with what it is that I understand that would be for my highest and greatest good. And then we can talk about it. It doesn't mean necessarily that I'll back down on what it is that I think is for my highest and greatest good, but it does mean that I'm interested in helping you understand how I'm feeling right now so that you don't necessarily take it personally. But of course, in order to do that, it requires us to be aware of our needs. It requires us to be aware of our desires. And how many of us really stop to be clear on what it is that we want or what it is that we're feeling? So I think the third thing that I really noticed on this path is how important it is to just stop and breathe. Just to stop, and before answering someone or before responding to an email or a text, to just stop and just, let the situation kind of wash over you, and then feel, what is it I'm feeling right now? What is it that I need right now? Because sometimes we'll just answer just out of, immediacy, feeling like we have to get back to someone quickly. Or if someone asks us to do something, we feel like just because we have time, we have to say yes. And sometimes we then can become resentful afterwards and feel upset at the person that we say yes, when really what the situation was is I didn't stop to reflect on how I feel and what it is that I actually want, and what it is that my time, my schedule, my heart will actually allow. Because sometimes, even if we have time, it's not necessarily what's for our highest, greatest good. It's not necessarily the right thing. And so I just would like to encourage you, and I also do my best to give myself time to just breathe and to reflect before answering. And that does mean I do not answer text messages immediately. Sometimes it'll take me a while to respond, but I feel like in this day and age of social media and, just WhatsApping all over the place, I feel like we have to give ourselves permission to be scarce. Because if we're constantly available, there is no time to think. There is no time to reflect. We're just in a constant energy of forcing, a constant energy of moving. And to me, divine feminine power, which all of us, no matter our gender identity, should have, is this energy of flow. It's this energy of stillness. And you can't really get into flow if you don't give yourself permission to be still. And so sometimes we have to be willing to be perhaps even unpopular, to get used to the idea that maybe someone won't like us as much as they did before, because now we're stopping to take time for ourselves. We're stopping to get clear on what it is that we want, and we're answering in kind. Because when we're clear on our values, when we're clear on what it is that we need, when we're clear on what it is that we want, when we answer in a certain way and people are critical of it, then we're more able to stand in our power and not to back down, because we know with clarity why we made a particular decision or what it was that moved us in that particular direction. So with setting boundaries, I feel like it's just this need to just get clear on what is it that is for my highest, greatest good, and how can I best communicate that to this person who means the most to me. Of course, there are certain relationships where it's probably best to just be clear and say no, but those are actually quite rare, in my opinion. Often we have good relationships with people where it can actually even be cathartic to stop and take the time to say, thank you, I appreciate you thinking of me, but actually I noticed that right now what I need is XYZ, and I'm making a point of giving that to myself, even if it's uncomfortable. you know. It's possible to say those things. And again, depending on the response, that I consider to be information about the health of the relationship. So I don't necessarily take that personally. If someone responds in a way that is critical, for example, similar to the way that the situation happened when I was younger, now I just see it as information. You know, I see it as a way to inform myself about the health of our friendship and whether or not this relationship is still for my highest and my greatest good. Because I feel like as long as I'm expressing myself with honesty and with compassion, there would be no reason for me to have to face criticism or stand up to being berated or made fun of for having different values than someone else has. Because when we set boundaries, sometimes we just notice we have different values. And when we have different values, something that feels comfortable to one person is going to feel uncomfortable to another person. So it doesn't mean that anybody in the situation is a bad person. And when you overstep someone's boundary, it doesn't mean that you're being inappropriate. It doesn't mean that you're being hurtful. It just means this person has these values. You have these values. And by living according to your values, you may accidentally move into a space that feels uncomfortable for someone else. And the only way to move through that often is to talk about it, is to be honest about it and to say, this is what feels good to me. This is what I perceive as being, you know, the highest, greatest good. And then to talk about that in kind. So I just, again, feel like I just wanted to share that with you because it was something that came up where I just realized how that one situation had an enormous effect on so many relationships that came afterwards, where I felt uncomfortable setting boundaries because I had then learned that setting boundaries meant that I was hurting the people that were close to me. And it became an act of masochism because in the end, I ended up continually and repeatedly hurting myself in order to spare others from this illusion of hurt that, in my opinion, wasn't even true, wasn't even the case, you know. So I hope that's helpful on your path. Perhaps it's something to think about, something to reflect on, giving the self permission to define what boundaries mean, to giving the self permission to define what it is that one needs, what it is that one wants, giving the self permission to stop and just breathe before responding, giving the self time before responding, and understanding that setting boundaries is not harmful to others. It actually really genuinely has the power to enrich relationships because it opens the door to a whole nother level of intimacy. If you take the time to communicate, it can open the door to a much deeper relationship with the other person. I hope that was helpful. I'm looking forward to the next video, and I hope we'll just continue to share. Like and subscribe if it feels good to you, and also just put your questions in the comments. If you have any questions about Reiki, any questions about astrology, any questions about energy, I just love this opportunity to share. I think one of the best things about social media, one of the best things about these platforms is the opportunity to share. There is no absolute truth in that sense, but we each have our own ultimate truth. That's Sagittarius energy. And Sagittarius energy is also about sharing. It's about the transmigration of ideas. So let's use this platform to share. Much love.